recording?
Today is May 26, 2024.
Sorry, Esther. No problem.
And Hebrew without so many years, and I have a...
And recording.
Today is May 26, 2024. We're here to interview Vera Salzberg, who is a survivor of the Holocaust. The interviewer is Esther Endor, and the videographer is Robert Wilson. And we're doing this interview under the auspices of the US Yeshua Foundation. The interview will be done in English.
And recording.
Okay, so good morning, Vera.
Good morning.
Thank you for accepting to do this interview. I really appreciate it. My first question will be if you could tell me your name and also spell it.
To spell it?
And
Oh.
tell, yeah.
It's Vera Salzberg. Tell my maiden name. And it's Salzberg. And Treitel is Treitel.
Could you tell me where and when you were born?
I was born in 1938 of April, of the 8th of April, and I was born in Žilina, which was at that time in Czechoslovakia.
Thank you. Now, you have a story about your name Vera and how you became Vera and not Marika. Could you tell me that story again?
Yes,
It's a very cute
That
story.
Everyone wants to know why. I have really two names. Till I was 6 years old, everybody knew me as Marika, but my real name was Vera. And how did this happen? My mother wanted me to be called Marika. I guess it must have been a very popular name in those days. And also my Hebrew name is Malka, so it's with an M. And so after I was born, my father went to the government, which was quite far with 2 or 3 streetcars in those days, to tell them that he had a daughter and to tell them where I was born and when and which name he wants. So the gentleman who was looking after him said, "I'm sorry, Marika is really not a real name, it's a nickname. The real name is Maria. So you want us to put Maria on her birth certificate?" He said, no. Could you wait a minute? Of course, there were no telephones, and it was quite far to go back to ask my mother what to do. And as he's walking up and down, thinking what to do, the guy behind the desk said to him, "You know, I just had a little girl, and we gave her the name of Vera. And it's very nice because it comes from the word veritas, which means truth." So my father liked it, and he said, "Good, you could put Vera on her passport, on her birth certificate." He goes home. My mother asked him, "So, did you take care of everything?" He said, "Yeah, I took care of everything." And so my mother continued calling me Marika, and my whole family knows me as Marika, or whoever knew me before I turned 6, they called me Marika. Anyways, when I had to go to school, I was 6 years old, my father gently told my mother, "You know, her name is really not Marika, because that should have been Maria, but it's Vera." All right, so it was too late. There was no arguments. It's reality, it was accepted. But she still called me Marika. It really came in handy because during the war, I was Maria. And this way it was not strange for me to answer to that name as a little girl. And so that's the story of my name.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to go back in time and talk about your grandparents. So I would like to start with your father's parents. Could you tell me what they were called?
Okay, my grandmother was called Nechama, and my grandfather was called, they called him Leiby, but his name was, you know what?
No, you're mixing up your paternal and maternal. Because the maternal grandfather was called Leiby.
Right. What did I tell you his name was?
Yitzhak Meir?
Yes, I'm sorry, I forgot. Yitzhak Meir. I guess I'm talking to public, I'm a little more nervous.
Don't worry about it, that's okay.
Yes, Yitzhak Meir.
Where did they live?
They lived in Košice, which was part of Czechoslovakia at that time also. And the reason why I speak Hungarian is because my mother is Hungarian and my father is Czechoslovakian. But in those days, everybody spoke Hungarian, even in Czechoslovakia, because we were on the border, so we learned the languages.
Well, it also used to belong to Hungary before World War I, so the Jews were Hungarian speaking there.
Right,
yeah.
so, but it kept moving the borders, and my children are always laughing, Mommy, how come everybody who comes from the olden days lived on the border? I said, you know, because the border kept changing, so everybody had a chance to live at the border.
What did your grandfather do for a living?
He was in textiles, and he was quite successful. They were very religious, and they were 10 siblings. Unfortunately, both parents were taken to Auschwitz. We're not quite sure when they died, but we keep their yard site Erev Yom Kippur, because that's when they took everybody from there. And also his 7 siblings with their partners, husband, wives, children, never came back. And his 2 sisters who were married and one had children, they came back without the husbands. So basically, my late father was very lucky that he came back with his wife and children, the only one out of 10 children.
Tell me about the 2 sisters who did survive. What was their names?
One was Malvin, and the other one was Sösi. And they were at one point in Budapest in the Védett house, in the
Protected house.
Protected house. And somehow, I don't remember why, their husbands were there too. And of course, it was protected, or maybe they wanted to see where the wives were, and they took them, both husbands, took them to the Danube, and they were unfortunately shot into the Danube at that time. So the wives unfortunately saw it from the window, which does not, that scene doesn't leave you. No matter how you live after my aunt, who came back without her husband, she had no children yet, and so she remarried and had 2 children from her second husband. He came back from the war and lost a wife with many children. And they lived in Israel after the war. And after many years, they came to America. They lived in New York. And it's an incident that I didn't tell you about. One Saturday night, my aunt and her husband went to some friends for a get-together. And the bigger son, which was at that time maybe 7, called his father, "Please come home right away, something terrible happened." He said, "What happened?" He said, "We're fine, but somebody was here and wanted to know where you are and where Mommy was, and he asked if we are from the first marriage or the second. What a silly man. And of course, they thought that this was not their real father. So of course, they right away went home, mother and father, and tried to calm down the children that this happened before the war, and this is really your daddy, and I'm your real mommy. Yeah.
And they never found out who that person was who asked this question?
I don't know.
So your father's father, he was in textile. Did he have his own business, his own store?
I think he had a store in Kassel. He was well known. They were well-known people. They gave a lot of tzedakah, and they were one of the nice families in Košice. In Košice.
When you say that they were very religious, do you mean they were Hasidic? Or were they Hasidic, or were they just Orthodox?
And they were Orthodox. He wore a beard. My grandfather and my grandmother wore a wig. But they were not Hasidish. They were Orthodox. In those days, it wasn't so much. It was either you were Hasidish or you were Orthodox, or you were not religious. But those that were Orthodox, I think everybody kept Shabbat and ate kosher, and there was no in-between like today.
I guess what I mean is that they weren't follower of a rabbi, of a Hasidic rabbi.
There could have been rabbis in the family. No, he was a businessman, my grandfather. Yeah. And
Go on.
And so was my father, and he also was in textiles.
Let's go on to your mother's parents.
Yes.
What were they called?
They were called Regina. We called her, everyone called her Regina Neni. And my grandfather was Ksil Yehuda, and there is a grandchild who is called after him, and they call him Laibi. Maybe he had another name from another grandfather. And they lived in Miskolc. They were not very well-to-do, and but this grandfather, he was like a real tzaddik, they called him. He was very honest and very, when he sent a letter with somebody to another town or another country, he would take the Hungarian stamp, the value of what it would cost him to mail it, and he would tear the stamp because he didn't want to steal from the government. Nobody stood behind him, but that's the type of man he was. And there were 5 daughters, and one of the daughters, the oldest, was my late mother. And then there was a second one.
Called?
My mother was Lily, or Tzivia in Hebrew, and next one was Clary, and her Hebrew name was Nechama. And then there was a third one, Magda, but she never came back from the war. She happened to be the educated daughter, and she worked in an office. And she decided that she has a job, and she will stay in Miskolc to keep an eye on her father, which was my grandfather, because at that time he was in the hospital and he was not well. Then there was a fourth, which was Roji, and a fifth was Yutzi. So 4 girls survived, and 3 were married at that time. And fortunately, the husband survived because we were all together in a bunker near Mikuláš, and the bunker was built into the mountain. And that's where we were hiding. And also, the 4 sisters were there, including my grandmother. My grandfather was left in Miskolc because he couldn't travel. Unfortunately, he and his daughter, the fifth sister of my mother, were killed in Auschwitz, and the four survived.
What, sorry, what did this grandfather do for a living?
Not much. He had they called it a factory. Certainly it was not a factory in the sense that we know today, but in the basement they would make cheese, cottage cheese. It was not kosher cottage cheese, so they could sell it. It was cheaper, and they didn't sell it to their Jewish friend. They sold it to the non-Jewish people, and the girls would deliver the cheese to whoever ordered. As I said, he was not a very wealthy man, but he was wealthy because he was an honest man. Everyone loved him. He had wonderful girls, and my grandmother was a really beautiful lady. And everybody says that Hashem was very good to her and kept her till 103, and her four son-in-laws were just wonderful to her. And they always say, my mother, her sisters, the brother-in-laws, that God gave her long life because she never ever complained to my grandfather that there is no money in the house. Whatever there was, they just managed.
How religious was this family? How religious was this family?
Yes, the same type religious as my other grandparents. Very, very religious, Orthodox, not rabbis, because they all were in business. But I think in those days, even the rabbis had businesses, and I think it was the wife who ran the business so that the husband could be the rabbi or sit and learn. It's not so different today, because today very many young religious boys who get married, they go to kollel, which is yeshiva after you're married, and they learn for a couple of years. The wife works, even though she has children in the middle, and the two parents try to support them until they're ready to come back. Usually they go to Israel or they go to other yeshivot, and until they're ready to come back and work and support their families, which is really not very easy, because by then some of them have many children, and they cannot live on a salary that a very beginner will start without an education. But we claim that learning makes your brain very, very strong and sharp. As a matter of fact, I have a son-in-law who is a lawyer, and he was learning until he had, I think, 4 children. He's married to my youngest daughter, and he went to McGill to be a lawyer. It was not easy. He had to learn French, and he's American. He has a horrible accent, but so do I. I have a Hungarian. He has an American accent, but he passed. And I'll never forget that the teacher one day tried to explain a very complicated law to be from the law. And the whole class did not understand it. And he explained again and again, and they just didn't seem to get it. And my son-in-law asked the professor, "Do you think you would give me permission to explain, because I understand it exactly, and you're telling it too high. I'll tell it much lower." And so So the professor looks at him. How do you know it? He says, well, he said it, and really they understood it. It was a logical explanation, starting with something high and then getting down to the level to understand. So the professor was quite surprised. You're first year law school, how do you understand this? He says, well, we reason like that in the Torah. And I am applying what I learned in the Torah. So these boys are not stupid. They have a good mind, because those that don't have a good mind, they go after a year, they go to work. But only the ones that really, really have good brains are staying and learning, because it's not a waste of time.
Of course. What you mentioned that this family was not so well-to-do as your father's family, and there's a story about your father. First of all, about your parents meeting, how they met, and then the reaction of your father's parents to this marriage.
Well, actually, my late father and mother, they were third cousins. And I think they probably met once or twice at a wedding, a family wedding. They lived in different countries, in different towns. They didn't get together so often. And somehow, the one or two times that they met, my mother and my father, they had a lot in common. And so he wanted to marry my mother, and his parents were not terribly excited. Even in those days, they wanted that the girl should have a trousseau. So, and they knew that the Goldsteins were very poor. And my father said, she has a trousseau. She has a beautiful trousseau. Really? Really? Anyways, my father did something that no groom, future groom, did then or would even do today, because this is the I generation. He was not amongst the I generation. He was in the U generation. And so he bought my mother's complete trousseau, linen, bedding, tablecloths. She had a few dresses made by a dressmaker. He paid for everything. And this way, when she came to meet her in-laws and to live in Czechoslovakia, she arrived with her beautiful trousseau.
Do you know if your grandparents ever found out that it was your father who paid?
I don't really know that part, but I don't know. Maybe not, because I never heard that they found out.
Let's talk about your father now. What was his name?
Morik Treitel, and his Hebrew name was Menashe, and he was born in Kassel, Czechoslovakia. He was born in 1910, in October 30, and he was also in the textile business. When he and my late mother got married, they did not live in Kassel because he had more opportunities to move to a smaller town, Žilina, which was at that time Czechoslovakia. And so they lived in Žilina, and he started to build up his business. And he had a non-Jewish partner who was very, very nice, and they got along very well. My father was not a racist, and a handshake was a handshake, and a promise was a promise. There were no contracts, nothing written down. And that's where I come in with my late brother. We were born in Žilina.
Before we move there, what kind of, you said he was in textile, what kind of textile business did he have?
Wools, cottons, no nylons in those days, I don't think so, but better materials, because I know, when we came to Canada, my mother was still old-fashioned in the sense that she had her clothes made to order, and they would go to a material store here in Montreal, and my late father didn't even have to look at it. He would just touch it, and he would say, "This is a good fabric."
So they had a store and they sold fabric.
It wasn't so much a store, I think. I think he traveled and he pre-sold it to stores. He would find out what the stores want or need, and he would buy accordingly.
So it was wholesale, basically.
Yes, it's wholesale. He had no place where he put it. As a matter of fact, it's very interesting. I'm just thinking of it this minute, that when he started his business here in Montreal, he was also in textiles, and it was basically almost the same idea. He was one of the first ones, I shouldn't say, he went to China, and he made connections, and at that time, China would sell to him, but he would buy with a contract. He found customers. There were a lot of factories here manufacturing all kinds of clothes. In those days, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, so that he was able to make contracts and pre-sell what he brought. And they did go to China twice. He went twice, and my late mother went with him once. And it was a very scary thing the first time, because the hotel, they took away their passports. They did not let them lock the door. So they pushed a dresser against the door at night. They didn't want anybody coming in on them. And as a matter of fact, I remember they had to take a vaccine and before going to China, and it so happened that my mother's arm got infected, and they were in China. And so she started walking out of the hotel and trying to find out where there is a doctor. But before she even could ask anybody anything, there was already somebody from the hotel running after her, trying to figure out, where are you going? She said, "I'm looking for a doctor. Come back. We'll call a doctor to the hotel." So that was China in those days.
Communist China. What was your mother's name?
Name?
Yeah, your mother's name.
Her English name is Lily, and her Hebrew name is Tzivia.
When was she born?
She was born also in 1910, and she was a few months older than my father. She was born in February. And so...
Do you know what year they got married?
Well, my mother was about 22, so 10, about 32. It must have been before, because my brother was born, actually, my brother was born in 35. Yeah, so about 22, 23.
Would you describe your parents to me, how they dressed, how they looked outside, and what kind of characters they were?
What they dressed?
How they dressed and what they looked like, from the outside.
Well, they dressed very nice, and my mother always had wonderful taste. She was always elegant, even when they had no money. That's an art. And she had a fantastic sense of humor, because one day my father said when he came home, "Why aren't you dressed up more elegant when I come home from a business trip?" She says, "Because I'm cooking for you supper." Anyways, next time he came from a business trip, she put on a dress that she wore for weddings and a big hat, and a small apron, and she was cooking by the stove when he walked in. He said, "So is this what you want?" He says, "No, no, no, I'm sorry." So that was.
How did your father dress? Did he wear a suit or a kaftan?
No, 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 he wore a suit. He wore a suit, regular, he was elegant, a tie.
Hat or kippah?
No, nobody wore a kippah in Europe. A hat. A hat, and if he traveled, he probably wore a cap, not a hat. As a matter of fact, I have a friend here who lives here also for a long time. And this was a result of Europe. Whenever today, in 2024, he travels across the border, he takes off his hat or his cap. And the children always used to ask, "Daddy, why do you do that?" He says, "This is automatic." Or a man would take off his hat in an elevator if a woman came in. Or if you went into a restaurant, not a Jewish restaurant, but a regular for some reason. And so it was, they expected you not to wear anything. As a matter of fact, the only picture that remained of my late grandfather, my mother's father, was only a passport picture, because it's the only picture he ever let them take. But there was no kippah because they didn't allow. So we painted a kippah on it, because that's my grandfather who's hanging here out then. Of course, I wasn't going to hang him up without a kippah and a beard.
But so your father would wear a hat outside the house. What would he wear inside the house?
A kippah.
A kippah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, a kippah.
And did he have payas?
No.
But he had
no.
a beard.
No,
No, not even a beard.
no.
But his father had a beard.
Yes.
Long or trimmed beard?
I have a picture. It was probably long. And my other grandfather also had a beard. My father did not have a beard. And even though my late brother grew a beard, but he became Lubavitch, which is so very different. And this shows my mother's cleverness. She never made a difference between being Lubavitch or not, even though their customs were different. And because she didn't want to lose her son, so she gave in. And I learned how to give in and how to keep a peaceful household. It's not always important to be the winner.
Did your mother wear a shaitel?
After the war, not. Before the war, yes. After the war, immediately, no. But a little while later, when my brother was 13, my parents sent him to a yeshiva in Switzerland. And he came home and he became very, very religious in the yeshiva. So my mother decided to cover her hair.
With a shaitel or with a kerchief?
First she wore a kerchief and a hat. And then we came to Canada. And one day, my late father had many connections in the bank, business people, and they all wanted to come to us for a meal whenever they came from out of town. So my mother would make a beautiful meal, but she would, let's say, wear a kerchief. And then one day she decided, this is ridiculous. They'll think, who knows, I'm sick, why am I wearing a kerchief? So she decided to get a shaitel. And of course she looked much better with it. And as a matter of fact, we had once a very big businessman coming to our house. And my mother served my father first, and then the guest. And he was a little surprised, but my mother right away noticed. So she said, in our religion, we serve our husband first and then everybody else, because he's the king of the house and the wife is the queen of the house, because the wife is the one who brings up the children while he's traveling and doing business. Actually, it's the mother who brings up the children. So in Jewish religion, if you're religious, the husband has a lot of respect for the wife. They didn't have to go demanding women's rights, because the husband saw her as someone with many rights. So religious women never went to demand for rights, because they had a lot of rights and they were respected for it.
You mentioned that your parents, once they got married, they settled in Žilina before the war. What do you know about their life there before the war and before you were born?
I would not know. I was little when when the war broke out. I was little.
I know, but I wonder if they told you something about their life, the apartment they had, the friends they had.
I don't know. No. I think I met their friends eventually after the war. Those that survived, I met. Like my parents would say, they lived in Žilina and these people lived. But I don't remember any social life there. I do remember the war, but not the good times. I was too little, and it didn't have to make such a big impression. It was natural. But when the war broke out, that was not natural. So
absolutely,
that's what I remember more.
Your brother, who was born in 1935.
Yes.
What was his name? You didn't mention it yet.
Eric in his English and Shaya in his Hebrew. Shaya Aryeh.
You mentioned that he lived for a while with your grandparents in Miskolc before the war.
Yes. What happened is that in Žilina there was no preschool for boys, like a cheder. You know, Jewish people start to teach a child after he's 3. They teach him the ABC, the Aleph Beis, and by the time he's 5, even earlier, depends how bright he is, they know how to pray from the Hebrew books. But the girls were taught at home. Anyways, I was only little, because he was 3 years older than me. So let's say if I was 3, he was already 6. So they sent him to Miskolc, to my grandparents, because they had a cheder in Hungary. He should study there, and he should have a little Jewish schooling. At that point, he didn't need to go yet to Hungarian school. He was less than 6. But then when the war broke out, you know, everybody got scared, and my parents wanted him home. And what happened is that my grandparents hired a non-Jewish person with a horse and buggy to take my brother back home. And of course, they were arrested. Yes, they were arrested. And my poor brother, he was a little boy, and they put him in a different cell than the guy who brought him. Even him, he didn't know so well, but it was the only familiar face. And he was so hungry, and they didn't give him anything. Anyways, they sent a telegram to my parents, what happened. And my parents hired someone and smeared, gave some money to the police, and they let them out, and they came back. This part I didn't tell you.
No. What language did your parents speak to each other? Your mother and your father, what was their common language?
Hungarian. We spoke Hungarian. That's why I speak Hungarian better than Slovak because Slovak I only spoke in school, Czech in those days. And Hungarian we always spoke at home. Actually, the whole family from Czechoslovakia to Hungary, everybody spoke Czech and Hungarian because, as I say, it was going back and forth. And my mother's language was Hungarian, and my father spoke Hungarian, so we all spoke Hungarian.
You were born in 1938, and the war broke out a year later. How did life change? What did your parents tell you after the war?
How life changed? Well, I mentioned that my father had a non-Jewish partner in the business, and he came to my father one day and he said, Morik, I really think the times for the Jewish people is going to be very, very difficult, the way things stand. And my sister, who is a nun, he said, I spoke to her and she would take your children in and you don't have to worry because she's the head nurse, the head nun, and she will look after the children and whenever you want them, we'll give them back to you. Anyways, my parents, of course, were not too happy about the idea, but the suggestion came with a good intent. So they put us really into the nunnery. And, you know, because in those days, if you had children, it was very, very hard to escape and to hide and whatever. This way, we were in the nunnery, and there were a lot of other children there, non-Jewish. As a matter of fact, I know there was another Jewish girl and 2 other Jewish boys. And the nun told the other boys that these 3 little boys must take a shower separate because they have a skin disease. And that's how these 3 boys were not recognized as Jews in the nunnery. And of course I was Maria and he was Eric, not Shaya or Malka. And we were there doing everything we were told to do, eat the non-kosher food. Of course it wasn't a sin, there was nothing else to eat. And to pray, as a matter of fact, that I remember that we went down to church. And as I walked down, I looked at the other girls the first time I was there, what they were doing. So I saw they made the cross and they put their hands together and kneeled. I did the same. And then they prayed quietly. And I prayed, I said, Shema Yisrael. And I said, Hashem, forgive me. But my mommy said I have to do everything the other girls do. And I don't know any other prayer. So I'm doing it kneeling in a church. But I'm talking to you, Hashem. So.
Have you heard from your parents? When did this happen that you were taken to the nunnery? When were you sent to the convent?
Nunnery? I think between 42 and 43.
So there were a series of anti-Jewish regulations, laws in Slovakia after 1939. Have your parents ever talked about any of this? What happened to them, you know, when you were still a baby?
No. All we know is that one day they came to the nunnery and we were so happy. They came to pick us up. They were just too scared. They didn't know what's going to be with them and what's going to happen to us. They felt whatever happens will happen to all of us, but at least we will be together. And so they took us to Mikuláš, which was a city on the, it was a mountain, a big mountain. They called it the Habenes. People went skiing there. We went there, I think, after the war. I'm not sure if it was that mountain or another mountain, but they took us, and they had made some arrangements with some peasants in the Mikuláš town to bring food and leave it by the mountain, on the bottom of the mountain. And we were higher up in a bunker, which was a hole in the mountain with trees covering and not to be noticed. And two people from the bunker every day had to go down. They took turns who would go down and bring up the food. I remember that my father in the middle of the war got hernia and he couldn't carry anything. So my mother went twice, once for him and once for herself.
Before we go to I still have questions about the nunnery, the convent, so let's not go to the bunker yet, because I have questions.
Yes.
So my first question is, do you have any memory of going to the nunnery from Žilina? How you went and who took you?
To visit?
No, when you went to the convent, when you were taken to the convent with your brother, who took you? Who took you to the nunnery from Žilina?
Oh, my parents. Or maybe it, you know what, I really don't remember, but it could have been that my father came with his partner, whose sister was the nunnery's head nun. Keep saying nurse, she was head nun. And because I know we went without making a big fuss. They prepared us. And I think we probably knew him because he was in business with my father, so I'm sure he must have come up to the house, you know, many times when they had to discuss things. Because I don't think he lived in Žilina. Maybe he was the one that was on the other end of the business, and they advised each other.
What were your first impressions of the nunnery when you arrived? Do you remember?
My first, well, they were dressed as nuns. In those days, everybody was dressed as a nun. And there was a big dining room. And I remember, oh, there's food. And we had to walk outside for fresh air and play ball. Don't forget, I was only 4.5, so it wasn't like I was going to school. And like I remember the incident in church, which we had to do probably every day. That's why it stays in my head. And the food.
What do you remember of the food?
That I wasn't hungry. We were not so fussy. As long as we got food, we were happy because it was scarce. Before they even took us, it was starting to be difficult times. So, you know, people didn't have the money or didn't have the opportunity to buy even food or most foods that we were used to. So we were not fussy.
What were the foods that you remember that disappeared from your diet as the war was going on?
The food?
You said that you couldn't buy everything that you were used to from before the war. What are the things that disappeared from your diet? Do you have any memory of that?
Of the war? Food?
During the war, yes, that you couldn't get.
One thing I remember, that there were times when the food was very little, and we would get sugar cubes, which were European sugar cubes, were bigger, and we had alpha, which was like a liquid, not it was a good liquid, which gave, so we would pour a little of the alpha on the sugar cube and bite it a little piece at a time. I know very often my mother gave me her half and my father gave his half to my brother. And also I remember that one day the men came in. They went out to get wood. They went out when we could put on the wood stove, because sometimes we had to be quiet, and when we heard noises or movement outside, we didn't want they should see the flames going out of the house. So I don't know, my grandmother went out one day to the bathroom, which was outside, and for a long time she didn't come back, so they got worried, and I think my father, my uncle, went out to look for her, and she had fainted because she was hungry. She never ate non-kosher food, so she ate only what was kosher, at least non-kosher meat. And somehow they saw a dead horse. I don't know how the dead horse got there. I mean, there were Germans and Ukrainians who scared us to death, because the Ukrainians we saw, the Germans we didn't. We thought that, you know, the Ukrainians are better, but they were pretty awful to us. And I remember that when we were in our first bunker, we eventually went higher up because we didn't want to be so close to town that they should come and find us. So we went to a higher bunker and, you know, into the mountain. And I remember one night we hear on top of our bunker walking around, and we heard Ukrainians, and we were petrified, and they found us. They made us go out, and they wanted only watches, which everybody gave whoever had a watch gave their watch. And my mother and my aunt dressed their husbands with kerchiefs because they divided the men and the women, and they didn't know what's going to happen, so that they should be on the same side. But what they did is they scared us, and they took all our provisions, sugar and flour and whatever, and they spilled it out on the floor, and they stepped over it. Instead of taking it, at least, it was just to show, we're not taking it, but you shouldn't have it either. So that I remember. I also remember how a horse got there. It's probably the horse died, and they just left him on the mountain. And the men brought the horse in, and all excitement, we're going to have meat. And they cut the horse up. And the ladies who were religious, they said, you know, we do have a little salt. Let's salt the horse, because we do that to make kosher the meat. And so they made it kosher, and they cooked it. And the funny part was, nobody could swallow it. We were sitting in front of a plate of horse meat and horse soup, but knowing that it was a horse, no matter how hungry we were, maybe some of them ate, but my family didn't, and we kids didn't want to eat it either. So that was the food.
In the bunker. I'm still returning to the convent, to the nunnery. You mentioned that there was a big room where you all ate, right? There was a big room where everybody ate, with the nuns as well and all the other children. Everybody ate together?
Yes, yes.
How did you manage to eat non-kosher food? How did that make you feel?
Well, I was very hungry if I wouldn't eat, and my parents told me that in order to survive, I must eat, and that Hashem is not going to be angry because he wants you to eat the food, because it's a big mitzvah to survive. And That's how the Jews are. Life is more important than death. And no matter how religious you are, but then when there is an emergency, you're absolutely allowed to do anything in your power to save the person, whether it's Shabbat or Yom Kippur or any holy day, you are allowed to do it to save a life.
Where did you sleep in the nunnery?
Where? We had beds. We had little beds, the way I remember. Not in the bunker.
But was it one big dormitory for all the girls?
Yeah.
Or did you have smaller rooms?
No, I think it was a big room. Maybe there were 2 big rooms, but we were definitely more, no private rooms. Right.
You mentioned that there were 2 other Jewish boys and 1 Jewish girl
Right.
beside you and your brother. How did you know that they were Jewish?
I think you do recognize who is Jewish. It's an instinct, I believe. And when we came back, as a matter of fact, I met them even in America. One of the boys and his sister I met in America. They came out. And the other boy I don't remember, but I know there were 3. And I don't know if I mentioned that the nun told the other boys that these 3 boys have to take a separate shower. Yes, I mentioned that. So she was very, very kind to us Jewish kids.
Do you think that other nuns besides
Excuse me?
do you think that the other nuns knew that you were Jewish?
We did everything we were supposed to, and she was the head nun, and we were part of her group. So maybe they knew, maybe they didn't, but they didn't say anything. Maybe they knew, but they didn't. Well, nobody behaved like they knew us, or we knew them.
What was the daily routine in the nunnery?
I think the boys learned, and they had exercise, and I remember playing ball in the garden. What else I did? We sang. I guess we prayed.
Did you have any chores, you little girls? Did you have to help the nuns?
No. We were little kids. No.
The other children there, how old were they?
It was a mixture, I think, and it's very possible that the bigger boys helped to carry the tables or whatever, but it was basically like a school, a sleepover school, or that's how it seemed to me at the time. That's why I never wanted to go away in a sleepover place, but I did.
Do you remember missing your parents?
Of course. We were overjoyed when they came to pick us up.
But you didn't see them between the time they dropped you there and came to pick you up?
A few months, yeah. I don't know how many months we were there, maybe 4 or 5, but that's a long time for a little child.
Absolutely.
But you see, I had my brother, which was a big help, and we saw each other. So that was a big help, and I became friendly with this other girl, and probably with some non-Jewish girls. But her I remember distinctly because I met her in America after the war, and we were like so happy to see each other.
When you were there in the nunnery together with this girl, did you talk about your background?
We never talked about it because we were afraid, but we knew. We knew. As you said, how did we know? You know, when you walk on the street and you would see me walking with a wig, you would and a long skirt, you would right away know I'm Jewish. A non-Jewish person will say you have such nice hair for your age. Okay, now it's a mess, but you know. And so they not necessarily would know we're Jewish. Someone who had a beard and a wig in those days the wigs looked really wiggy, and they wore kerchiefs, so they knew right away. I mean, the Germans, to make trouble, they cut your beard, and then they cut your payas, and all these things.
Did you have any close calls when you were in the nunnery? Any dangerous situations, soldiers coming, Germans coming?
No. It was, I don't remember. I think if it would have been something terrible, I would have remembered. No, it was a peaceful, quiet place, and we had food. Of course, we didn't have our parents, so that was very hard. But I had my brother, so as I said before, so at least I had a family member, and we were very close till the day he died. So
now I arrive to the bunkers. You already said a few stories about the bunker, but I'll have some more questions. You mentioned that it was your father's non-Jewish partner who helped them find this place, the bunker, right? Your father's non-Jewish partner found those people.
Yes.
And
well, it was his sister.
no, not the nunnery, but the bunker above Mikuláš. It was your father's partner, no, who knew some people in Mikuláš.
Oh, I see.
That's what you told me.
Yeah, so my father couldn't go down to pick up.
No, but to find this place to hide,
to find this place,
it was your father's partner?
I think it was my uncle, my mother's fourth sister, Clary. She had just gotten married before the war, and he had been instrumental in working with soldiers, and he had a lot of connections, even with non-Jewish people. So he arranged, and they were quiet about it. Of course, they got paid, but for some lucky reason, they never squealed on us, even though the first bunker they found. But I think they found it on their own. They didn't have to be directed. They knew people were hiding, the Ukrainians, everybody knew Jews were hiding. And my grandmother did not look very Jewish, so she would go down every Sunday, supposedly to church, and she would pay the people who brought the food.
Can you describe what this bunker looked like inside?
The bunker, well, we were 30 people.
Who were these 30 people?
25, 30 people, and it wasn't very elegant. It was like a shelf in the middle of the room, and we slept on the bottom and on the shelf, family by family, and I don't even know what we used for covering. My aunt told me I was very close to my mother's youngest daughter, sister, because she was only 9 years older than me. So when we got married, we were very close to each other. It was almost like sisters. She told me, Marika, you were even in the bunker neat. You used to put your 2, 3 little things folded in the corner. How much did we have already? Not much.
Who were these 25, 30 people? Who were these 25, 30 people?
They were people that my father and my uncle knew, other Jewish people. Otherwise, we were afraid to just take anyone in. They could tell on us. Unfortunately, even Jewish people told on you if the life depended on it. So these were people that my parents knew of, or my uncle knew of, or they did business together, or they lived as neighbors. So that's who they were.
your mother's family comes from Miskolc,
Yes.
but as far as I know from your cousin, they were in Košice, the girls, before the war.
My cousin.
Yeah, Juliana
Oh,
Nevish. Yeah, she said that the girls
Yeah,
were in
she
Košice.
not in Košice. She doesn't remember. It was in Budapest. She lived with her parents in Budapest, and then they took her father to the workforce, and then we found out about it, and my parents plus my uncle, you know, my two aunts and my father and my uncle took her with her little girl, who was maybe 2 at that time, and they also brought my grandmother and my youngest aunt, my mother's youngest sister, who was so close to me in age, so they came to the bunker also with us.
From Budapest?
I am not sure from where they came, but I know they were there because my uncle they took, and we took my grandmother, my parents took my grandmother away from Miskolc. And it's possible they brought, well, she had still a daughter, my grandmother, and she looked very Jewish. She had a big nose and red hair and freckles. And I don't know, once my grandmother went with her in a train, and my grandmother didn't look Jewish, but she did. So it was already not such great time. So my aunts pretended to sleep, and her head was in my grandmother's lap with her face down. And the ticket master came for tickets, so he picked her head up by the hair and looked at her, and he told my grandmother, "You shouldn't travel with this girl. Like to tell you, you know, she's Jewish. Why are you taking her?" But they didn't arrest them at the time. It wasn't still arresting time, but it was bad.
So going back to the bunker, you said that the shelf was in the middle of the bunker where you slept?
Well, the floor, and then there was a big shelf all around the bunker.
All around the bunker,
Yeah.
all around the wall?
All around except for the door, and the door was covered with trees and ice and whatever to camouflage the door.
How big was this bunker that housed 25 people? If I
It's-
look around this room, do you remember?
Maybe it was this size, not bigger, because they had to dug it.
Who dug it? Who
It
prepared
was
it?
those non-Jewish people who lived in Mikuláš, and they're the ones who brought us food.
What else was there in the bunker? Did you have any chairs, any tables to use for eating?
Maybe we had a table, few chairs, but because that was like the middle, we sat on the edge. We probably ate in the, like, which was our bed, we held the food. We didn't have so much food that we should worry that it's going to spill over and make it dirty. It was eaten before you even sat down, and it was gone.
How did you cook?
Well, we did have some pots, I guess, and they cooked on a fire, on wood. And
On an open fire?
yeah, but they cooked it outside, because inside, and then we had to hide away. When we heard every time we finished, they covered this outside cooking area with trees and whatever, because if they would come and see, they would right away know that someone is around. So that was hidden. So we had to be very careful not to cook at night because it's more visible. And there was not so much to cook. We even ate the peels of the potatoes, which was delicious, if we had potatoes.
What kind of food do you remember that these people brought up?
Bread, maybe soup, not much meat. Just about, and the sugar cubes I remember very distinctly.
Vegetables? Do you remember any vegetables?
Maybe in the soup. In those days, we didn't eat raw vegetables. Wasn't in style salads and stuff like that. And probably by the time we got it, they were half rotten. So it was better to cook it.
Did you go hungry in the bunker? Do you remember being hungry?
Yeah. I remember my aunt, there was one person there. I don't know how she had a box of chocolate, but she must have brought it still with her. And my aunt was relishing, was dying to have a piece of chocolate. My Aunt Clary, my mother's second youngest. And she promised her anything she wants. She had a silver compact. She had a piece of jewelry. She said, "I'm sorry, I can't eat the compact and I can't eat the jewelry, but I can eat my chocolates, and I'm sorry, I can't give you any." You know? In those days, there were some very good people who shared, and there were people who were selfish for a good reason. They tried to stay alive. Listen, you hear stories in Auschwitz, how they shared the food and tried to help each other.
How did you do washing? Washing of clothes and washing yourselves?
Washing?
Washing, yeah, when you were in bunker.
Well, when there was snow, it was not a problem. They just brought in a bucket and it melted. Sometimes we drank that water when there was no water. There was no running water. So they just brought up, and in the summer they must have brought more water because there was no snow. We weren't that clean because we didn't have so much clothing. So we more or less put back the same clothing, or maybe we had a little change, but basically we had a set of clothing.
That was on you.
On us, right?
How did you wash yourselves?
With the snow. Well, you know, you left the water melt and it became water. So,
And
listen, if you washed ourselves once a week, it was cold in the winter, and there wasn't that much water, so we had to be very careful.
And in the summer, how did you wash yourselves, or the other seasons where there was no snow?
I think that they brought up water, but it was very little. We had to, you know, I guess a family got a cup of water, and then we had to use the same water to wash.
Do you remember any illnesses that anybody was ill in the bunker?
What happened is when we heard, I don't know how we heard, but I guess we heard that the war was over. And so we started to walk. And as we knew, I think my uncle had a compass, and he knew which way we have to walk. And so we walked towards the city. But when we started out walking, it was very sad because we knew there were some other Jewish people in another bunker, and we saw them all dead on the road. I mean, road. There was a little walkway, and we had to walk like 1 foot in front of the other, and one person, we in single file. So it was like my father, my brother, me, and my mother at the end, and kept reminding us not to step on the side. because they could have had acne, hogy hívják?
Landmines, mines.
Mines, right. And so we had to be very careful. But those people did not die by being killed. Those people died because they froze. They left before us. And I remember asking my mother, look, Uncle so-and-so and Tante so-and-so is resting. I'm so tired. Why can't I also lie down? So she said, no, we're just going to go to the next Tante and Uncle. And so she got me to walk and walk and walk because I was tired. I want also to lie down, you know. Everybody was tired, but the kids also. And Juliana, that's my cousin who was 2, my uncle carried her the whole time on his shoulder back. And when she cried in the bunker, we did have some schnapps, I don't know. Probably we kept it for the Ukrainians and whatever. So they used to give her a little bit to lick. She should fall asleep when we heard commotion outside.
Were there many other children in the bunker with you?
No, we were just my brother and me and my cousin. That's
And
all.
the other people who were not relatives, they were all adults?
Not even married couples. Some people were single, some were couples, some were sister and brother, some were mother and daughter, or a father and daughter, depended. It wasn't all couples thing or all, no, there were not too many children. And I'm sure that they were not so happy with us. I mean, we were quiet. We knew to be quiet, my brother and me, but my 2-year-old cousin didn't know how to, that she has to be quiet and she's not allowed to cry. She was too young to understand that.
How did you know that you had to be quiet? What did your parents tell you?
Well, we came, how? Well, these were not normal circumstances. We did not live like we, in a normal surrounding. So it was not normal for children to be quiet or to jump around or to play. I was a very quiet child. I was a very serious child after the war. And my husband was 6 years older. And I liked him because he was older. And he liked me because I was enough serious. Even though I was 6 years younger, he didn't consider me as, she's like a baby still. Because I was 21 when we got married. Because I was very serious for my age. I always was. As a matter of fact, when I started to have grandchildren, I sat on the floor and played with them. And, it was not so usual that a grandmother should sit on the floor. But, I missed playing. And I always loved dolls because I never had a doll. My father brought me once a doll after the war, from his business trip. And of course, in those days, the dolls had a porcelain face. And all my friends came to see a doll. Could I hold your doll? Could I hold your doll? Be careful, be careful. And somebody dropped her, which was a tragedy because her face cracked. But we didn't cry because we were happy to have a doll no matter what. I loved that doll to pieces with a cracked face. So they took her to the doll hospital, they called it, and they glued up her face. And even after, when I bought my own children, I always bought them dolls. And before Passover, I used to take all the dolls and all the clothes and clean up and wash the clothes and fix up the buttons. My husband always says, "Are you cleaning for Passover or are you playing?" I said, "I guess I'm doing both." And I do have 2 dolls on my bed, a blonde and a dark, one for my husband's dark hair and one for my light hair. And this he bought me not in Madeira. This was maybe 25 years ago. And I saw these 2 dolls and I said, "Would you buy me these dolls?" And he looked at me, "Sure, you want to have these dolls?" I said, "You know, I never had my own dolls except for the cracked head. Would you buy me these dolls?" And he did. And the grandchildren know, and the great-grandchildren, you can't touch, that's Bobby's dolls.
What did you and your brother do in the bunker all day?
That's a good question. You know, they had stones, so they played. We had to make our own toys.
So what kind of toys did you make?
Well, we had sticks, and my brother made, I don't know where he got an elastic, but he made, you know, from sticks. And
Tuesday.
and with an elastic, he put the stone in and it flew. And we played with stones, and I think I did have a doll, which was no blanket or anything like that, which I took to the nunnery and which I took with me. I mean, when we came home, that doll smelled of filth, and I had to throw it out. But
were you allowed to go outside the bunker when it was
yes,
quiet?
we were allowed, but they had to be on the lookout to see if nobody was coming. Because I think they did things in the daytime because you could see better in daytime. You know, they probably had a cooker, or maybe these peasants came to tell us to be careful. You know, they were well paid. Everybody paid. And so they were quiet, because if they wouldn't be quiet, they would lose a lot of money. So we did keep safe.
Did your parents kind of keep you busy, or they left you to your own devices to occupy yourselves?
Well, we were all together all the time. I mean, not that much space. Well, you know, we were like together, and maybe I played with my brother or we played with my little cousin, but there wasn't much to do.
How about the winter when it was cold outside?
We went out. That's how my grandmother fainted outside on the snow. And that's how they found the horse at that time. We did go out a little bit. We needed to have air, fresh air. I don't know how much clothing we had to bundle up, but we didn't go far, just right around the bunker. Because if we had to run in, we had to be close. So till where the toilet was and back was a little walk.
What kind of a toilet did you have?
A hole. A hole in the ground. Yeah.
Did you have enough warm clothes to go out in the winter?
Well, I know that when I went to the nunnery, I did have clothes, and then I must have taken the coat and the sweater. I didn't have a lot of clothes, but I must have had more than one change. But then, you know, with time, it got dirty and soiled because there was not that much washing. And I remember when we started walking to our freedom, there was a horrible rain and we all got drenched. And by the time we got like halfway to that mountain which we wanted to cross to get to a town, we had to stop because the next day was sunny. I mean, we had to stop to rest and sleep, but everybody had to take their clothes off and hang it up on trees to dry in the sun because, we didn't have so many changes. And what happened after we had to, it was still very icy on that mountain, and we wanted to get to the bottom of the mountain. So we had to basically sit and slide down. And my late mother still had a very, very bad bruise on her thigh because there was a piece of ice sticking out. And when she slid down, she went straight into that ice piece. And I have a frozen big toe, which is very bothersome in shoes. And it was frozen too.
You said that you had to sleep when you were walking down the mountain. You slept somewhere?
Yes, when we
Where?
got to the bottom of the mountain, we saw light. It wasn't very close to the bottom, but we saw in a distance some light. It was night, and very, very far more lights. But that was very far. But the close light was very frightening because who could be in that little house on the bottom of the hill? It could be the enemy, it could be anybody. So my uncle, the one who was the hero, he said, you all stay here quiet and I'm gonna go slowly down and try and look in and find out what's doing there. But of course, as soon as he got close to the house, 2 dogs started barking. And that's why we Jews don't like dogs, or most of us are scared of dogs because that was a German gimmick to scare you. And so he went, and it turned out that it was an old lady who lived there alone. Her husband had died, and I don't know, they brought her food from the village. And she said, so my uncle asked if we could possibly come to her house. We're like 30 people. It was a small house. Just till the morning that we could continue to walk down. And she made us hot soup. Now, I still feel the taste of that soup today, how absolutely delicious it was. First hot food. For a few days, we were walking and sliding and freezing and getting wet, and finally we're in a house with food. It was soup.
Where did you sleep on the way down from the mountain before this house?
It was where we got wet. When we started out, we were drenched, and we had to stop and take our clothes off because there was sun the next morning, and then after we went further.
But you slept in the forest, on the forest floor?
We sat, yeah.
And all of you went together from the bunker when you left?
Yes. Who was in this bunker? It's very possible that some of the people from the bunker decided to go back the other way, back to the village.
To Mikulás.
And we went, because my uncle said it's closer to where we want to go, is go the other way.
Do you know what that village was?
Where the lady was in that village.
Do you know the name of that village, the other village?
No, but we went to Prešov.
From there?
We tried, it was a village with a road, and there were a lot of trucks going there already, and horse and buggies, and the soldiers coming back, or I don't know who were in the trucks. And so we begged for some lifts. So like my grandmother and we kids and whoever first needed to go, and the men would walk. My father couldn't walk, he had hernia. And we got to Prešov, and before we went into the town, they stopped us and we had to be deloused, which for sure. And they burnt our clothes. They gave us some, I don't even know what they gave us to go into town. So you can imagine how we looked. And it was Erev Pesach, Passover, and it was the first night. And we knocked on the door of these people that we knew very well. We ourselves lived at one time there with my parents for a short time in this apartment, and then we went to Zsolna. So my parents decided, we know this house, let's go see who's there. So they knocked, and it was a Feldman family who was very nice to us. Can you imagine? Dirty, bedraggled people in hanging clothes, smelling, I think, of the disinfectant. They took us in, made room, everybody on the floor. They brought whatever they had to lie down. And I remember my parents told me this, that it was unbelievable how we two kids, my brother slept in the bed with the Mr. Feldman by his feet on the other side, and I slept by Mrs. Feldman's feet. They wanted the kids to have a better place to sleep, so they took us in. And I remember we were there, we had food, they had some food, not who knows what. And then we decided to go back to Košice, Kašau. And to go back, we didn't go back to Žilina, to Zsolna, because my father's parents lived in Kašau. And in those days, when you came back from war, you all went home to your original home to see who's going to show up. And unfortunately, just my two aunts showed up with the two little boys. Nobody else came back. Actually, one aunt came back with two girls, but she had lost her husband, and the husband was my father's brother. So she was really a sister-in-law. But they didn't come back to that house. She went back to her parents' house. And then we found out that, they were in Theresienstadt. As a matter of fact, I went to look at Theresienstadt when I was there with my husband. And I'm sure everyone knows the story who was there, that they had paintings that the children made with birds and flowers and beautiful houses and grass, because that's what they made them do for publicity. If they came to look, this was like the sample place where they had concerts, and we had food. Everything was beautiful. And when they all left, the Red Cross or whoever came to check, we went back to our old life. The men were beaten and no food. And after the war, the people who went to check out this place found many, many paintings in the walls, which were the really true paintings, which the children made with barbed wire and with guards, and no flowers and no birds and no nothing.
Going back to the bunker, your bunker, I have a few questions.
To where?
To your bunker, the bunker you were hiding in during the war.
Yeah, the bunker, yeah.
Yes. One of the questions is, how did you keep warm inside the bunker during the winter? Because you were there the winter of 43, 44, and 44, 45. 2 winters you did there. So how did you keep the bunker warm?
How
did you keep the bunker warm in the winter?
Oh, warm. It wasn't so warm.
But did you have some kind of heating in the winter?
not electric heating. If
No.
anything, they would maybe bring in the fire and watch it. Be careful that it shouldn't burn down or burn the house, burn the bunker. So, and then they had to, they had to be very, very careful and very, very ingenious. And they can probably do it only in the daytime, because at night it would be visible if somebody would come up on the hill.
But the bunker didn't have a window, you told me.
No window. We had like a kind of a door,
What kind of door? How did it close?
a wooden door. I don't know. And it was covered anyways with branches to look like the surrounding scenery.
Do you remember what the ceiling and the walls of the bunker inside were made of?
What it looked like?
No, what was the ceiling? Was it earth, the ceiling and the walls of the bunker, or
The
rock?
the walls I think were, I know the shelves were wood. What the walls were, I wouldn't remember. Today I would know because my husband was a builder, but in those days I didn't know what it was made of. At least I don't remember. I know the door was wood.
And the ceiling?
Must have been part of the mountain, and maybe they put wood or something. It shouldn't keep falling down because there was snow and there were people walking on
Yeah,
top.
that's what I'm asking. How did you, what kind of light did you have? Candles or lamps?
Candles, I don't think we had. We might have had batteries. You see, they could bring it up for us also. The guys from the, it cost money, but thank God everybody had some money saved. I mean, my mother had jewelry and money sewn into the hem of her dress. And so I guess we had what to pay them off. I know we didn't have candles but we had matches. Why do I remember? Because when they lit candles for Shabbat, I know my father held 2 matches while my mother said the prayer over the Shabbos prayers. By then the match was out, so everybody had to hold, for whoever wanted to light candles, 2 matches. Or even if we had a few candles, we couldn't possibly use it up for candle lighting because it was a very, very scarce item.
How did you observe the holidays?
There were no Shabbat we kept, and the holidays we kept like Shabbat. What could you do?
But did you know when there was Yom Kippur? Did you know when there was Rosh Hashanah,
Yes.
Seder night?
They knew. That part I don't remember what they did, because I don't think we did anything different than Shabbat, let's say. You're allowed to warm up food. If you had food to warm up, you were allowed to go down the hill to bring food because you are saving people from starving.
So it was all pikuach nefesh.
Of course. Yeah.
Do you remember anybody getting sick, getting ill in those 2 years, year and a half?
No, these were mostly young people. And listen, my parents were also young. We were kids.
Yeah, but you could have had a cold or something. Even the kids could have had
Sick, I don't remember anybody being really sick. I know that my father had hernia, and he had a problem, so my mother didn't let him go and schlep up the stuff. But when he had to walk, he, pushed it back and he walked.
And you children were never sick? No fever, no?
Not that I remember of, no. Even if I had, what would they do?
I am just asking because
Yeah,
maybe you
I
have a
know.
memory of something.
Yeah, no, I don't remember being sick. No. We were toughened up.
How about lice? You all had lice?
Oh, yes, and head lice was the worst. When I talk of lice, my head itches. They did have 1 year here in my grandchildren's school, lice. There was a few years ago, there was like an epidemic of lice, and they had parents go and take care and help with nurses to, you know, to check if it was all gone, because they had this strong shampoo. When I heard it, my head itched so much, I couldn't even, well, go for sure I didn't go. It was already, I had no grandchildren, so I didn't have to go. But my head itched the whole time my kids talked about lice.
Do you remember any close calls when you were in the first bunker?
Well, the one time which we had on top of us, the Ukrainians, even though they were not at that time enemies of Czechoslovakia, but they knew we were Jewish. So they could have killed us very simply.
That was in the first bunker when the Ukrainians came.
In the first.
And no other close calls apart from this?
No.
And then you said that you went higher up the mountain to a second bunker. Who built that one?
Also the guys. The guys, and maybe my uncle instructed them. Yeah. From the second bunker, we went already back after the war, and that's when we got wet and found the people on the floor.
How long were you in this second bunker, do you know?
In the bunkers?
The second bunker.
Altogether.
No, altogether you were there from mid-1943 to about April 45. But how long did you spend in the second bunker?
I have no idea of time.
Do you know if you had a winter in that bunker, in the second bunker?
We must have had a winter, because when we came back, when we started going home, these people from the other bunker were frozen, and we had to slide down on the mountain. Now, it could have been that the mountain was still frozen, and when you got all the way down, it wasn't. It was in the mountain, still winter, but maybe spring, because it was Passover time about.
Exactly.
So it depends. I mean, here Passover is still cold. It was also a cold country, so it could have been not in the, town.
Yeah. How different was this second bunker from the first bunker?
Same.
Same arrangement, same shelf?
Yeah, I think maybe they even used from the first bunker the wood. It was easier to take it from there than from all the way down.
And then the men still went down every day or every second day to get the food?
Still had to go down, yeah.
Do you know how long it took them to go down and then come back up?
Long. Probably an hour down, an hour up. More up than down. Yeah.
Do you have any other memories of these bunkers that you didn't tell me yet, that I didn't ask?
In the bunker?
Yeah, any other memory that stands out?
There was no memories to make there. We were just quiet. What did they do in Auschwitz? They were quiet or they were working. We were very lucky that there was nobody beating us up to work. They would have taken us and killed us right away, kids, right? So in that sense, we were very lucky. And we were with our parents, and we knew that much instinctively we knew to be afraid. But we were together, and our parents kept saying, as long as we're together, everything is okay. And so we believed, and it was, luckily.
You said that you went down to the mountain, and then you went to Prešov, where you arrived at Seder night. Can you describe that first Seder night when you arrived at this family?
The first Seder night was over. We arrived, they were already sleeping. We woke them up. But the second Seder night, we kids were probably sleeping. Everybody was so tired. It was just probably a 1, 2, 3 Seder. You know, everybody was exhausted.
Of course. And by the way, when you were in the bunker, did your father pray every day? Did your brother pray every day? Like the morning prayer, the Mariv, all that. Would they do that every day? Your father and your brother and the other men?
To do what?
To pray, to do the morning praying, the afternoon
Oh,
prayer.
you mean a minyan?
Yeah.
Well, my brother was little, so he didn't have to have a minyan. I don't think so. I don't remember at least that part. Maybe not everybody was religious and they didn't want, or they were afraid, or...
Did your father lay tefillin every day? Did your father lay tefillin every day?
I don't remember. I don't remember.
And
It's
after
funny.
the war? After the war, he would?
Yes,
Yes.
of course.
But you don't know if in the bunker he did that?
Maybe they had one and they shared it because, I mean, they knew we're going to a bunker, so they usually a Jewish man who is religious, the only thing he carries, if he can only carry a little bit, is his tefillin and his talit. So we had a list. My uncle was religious, and my father, and they must have had more religious items.
Do you remember any prayer book in the bunker?
No. No, first of all, I didn't know how to read in those days yet, not any language. We didn't have books, children's books, that I should remember that they would read it to us. We had to make up our own book. You know, you could run and you could hide behind somebody and you found me, you didn't find me. We had to improvise games. But then even after the war, we didn't have all these toys that the kids have today. Or you walk into a grocery store and there's candies from top to bottom, even on Passover. I went to my grocery store before Passover. I said, "Are you sure everything is for Passover here?" He said, "Of course." I said, "This is terrible. You should pay the mothers for the dentists because the kids walk in and they want everything they see. And they get everything they see."
So now we're back to Košice. Your parents and you went back, and your brother. How did your parents pick up their lives and their livelihood after the war?
After the war, where we stayed in Košice. My parents had rented an apartment. We did not live in my grandparents' house. It probably was not, either was not livable or we couldn't upkeep it, you know. So from where my father took money at that time, I don't know, but he probably saved money when he worked. And he could have maybe found stuff in my grandparents' house and sold it. And that's how you started up. And I went to a non-Jewish school. There was no Jewish school in Kašaus. And they were pretty mean to me. We were 4 Jewish girls in the class, and we were all keeping Shabbat, happened to be. And we had embroidery class on Shabbat. And I did not do my embroidery. I was excused. I had to be in school, and I had to have my embroidery with me. Now, here we carry on Shabbat because we have
An eruv?
an eruv. But of course, in those days, there was none. And so we had a non-Jewish person walk me to school, bring my school bag, bring my lunch, and pick me up when school was over and walk me back home with my. And of course, when I showed my teacher after Shabbat on Monday my embroidery, which I did, I asked one of the girls, non-Jewish girls, I knew them, to show me. So I did it. And when I showed it to the teacher, she flunked me. I don't know how I had the nerve to ask her why. She said, "How do I know you did it?" After that, I was just quiet, no answer. First of all, I was scared. We were still scared. And secondly, you know, you didn't answer to an older person in those days. So that was the end of the story. She failed me.
Do you remember other incidents in school? Do you remember other incidents in school, anti-Semitic?
Well, not that much. I mean, you know, Friday, we had to be in school on Shabbat. And that was the only time when there were incidents, because it's the only time that I couldn't do what everybody was doing. But during the week, there was nothing, you know, nobody was going to restaurants and nobody had big lunches. So we were more or less the same after the war. I know my father started going after the war, maybe a year after. He started traveling to other European cities about textiles. And he was a smart man. And in 48 of February, he didn't tell us anything. He said to us, put on your nice coats and we're going on an outing. Take your doll and take your favorite little car. And we're going on an outing. And this was right after we came home from school, and this is what happened. And we went with a car, and we went to the train station. So where are we going? We're going on an outing, on a very nice place. And so we didn't know that we were leaving Czechoslovakia. Of course, the porter knew already when he came for the tickets that we were leaving. But in those days, the communists didn't close the border yet. It happened 2 weeks later when we were out. And my grandmother and my aunt's little boy were
Which
stuck.
aunt? Which aunt? Because you have several aunts. Which aunt's little boy?
Clary. She was the one who lived there. Rosie went back to Hungary with her husband, and my grandmother was with us in Belgium, and my youngest aunt, Jutsi. So they came with us. Jutsi, my grandmother, and the little boy stayed in Košice, and my uncle and aunt came with us just to look around and see what possibilities he will have to make a living. And in the meanwhile, the border went down, and they were there, and we were here. But they finally arranged. In those days, money spoke. Everybody was crooked, the border control, everything. The passport giver, you gave them money, everything was hanky-dory.
Do you remember this journey from Košice to Belgium?
Yes, I remember.
Can you describe it?
Well, I know that we had suitcases. We had a compartment. And I remember there were suitcases in the middle, because my parents took more than just for an outing. And the reason why they didn't want to tell us, because they were afraid we might tell the teacher that we'll forget, and then they'll come after us before we even have a chance to get on the train. And I remember it was very long. We sat and shook. And when we were tired, my mother put something on the suitcase and she said, lie down on a suitcase, because people were sitting on the, you know. And still we arrived. I know we had an apartment, It was a furnished apartment, part of a house, which my father rented 2 rooms, and the bathroom was upstairs. It was not 2024 bathrooms or houses. And that's where we went when we arrived. And then later, my father worked, and we had a very nice apartment on Langelheimstraat. And it just so happens that the whole building, we were about 5 families, were Jewish. And we, till today, I mean, they're all gone, most of them. We became very close. I remember going, for instance, to Israel many times as an unmarried person. Even as a married, I would visit my auntie Mueller, Tucci. I would go and visit her, and she would call me, Marika, Marika, you're here? She still knew my other name. And other people, we became very friendly with everyone, but then after, everybody went somewhere else. And
you went to Belgium. Why did your father choose Belgium? Do you know?
At that time, he did a lot of business in Belgium, and he was able to bring us to Belgium. I guess he was one of the countries. It was a peaceful city, quiet, Antwerp, not a big hoo-ha city. You know, you don't want to be sticking out after the war. You know, nobody wanted to stick out being Jewish or whatever, even though it was a very Jewish city. And that's why he picked. But you could never, ever become a Belgian citizen unless you were born there. But it has to be at least 2nd generation. So that's why my aunt was here already, Rosie, the one from Budapest. Someone brought them out here, and then she put in a request for us, and she guaranteed. And then we put in a request for my Clary, who was in Israel at the time with my grandmother. So she requested for them to come. And there was one more aunt living in Israel at the time, married with 1 child.
Judith?
And Yutzi, you know. And, you know, she couldn't come out. Somehow they didn't want to give them papers to come to Canada. So my grandmother wrote a letter to then Prime Minister of Canada. I think it was Diefenbaker or the one before, I'm not sure, that I am a survivor and I'm an old lady and I don't have so much time to live, and I please ask you to let my baby daughter, her husband and baby, come to Canada so I should have them also near me. They gave them. That was those days.
Why did your father want to leave Czechoslovakia in the first place? Or your parents?
I don't know. He had this feeling that something is coming. He had a good nose about these things. He noticed that things were changing a little bit. Not that it was so great, but anti-Semitism was great. And why should we stay in an Eastern country where we had the war? He would rather come out and live in a more peaceful area. And that's why he chose Belgium at the time.
What happened to his partner after the war? The business partner who had helped him during the war? What happened to his business partner, the non-Jewish business partner who had even
Oh, you
helped him
asked
during
me
the war?
this. I'm not sure.
So they didn't take up their business together after the war?
No, no, they lost communication. For all I know, he died. We don't know what. Maybe my father tried so hard to find out what happened to one of his brothers and his wife and daughter who lived in Paris. I have all the letters, everything, pictures of them. He had a lawyer whom he paid for many years in Paris to see if he could trace at least where they died or where they went. He never could, never could. But you know, there was this roundup of Jews, so there must have been part of that.
Julia, don't touch your mic too much.
Oh, I'm
because
sorry.
then it's gonna make a sound. When you moved to Antwerp, what area of Antwerp did you live in?
Antwerp was not very big. We lived in a very cheap apartment, so it wasn't the best area because my father didn't know where he's going to settle. But then later, we lived in a nice area, Langeleem Street. Antwerp was not so big. You could walk almost to anybody on Shabbat. And, you know, we used to walk into the park, which was not far from us, and other people came to the park Shabbat afternoon, and I walked to school, so we could go downtown walking. I remember my mother taking me the first time to a piano concert, which was downtown or in the city. We walked. It was my first experience of a piano concerto. It was Arthur Rubinstein, and he played Chopin, and that's my favorite music till today.
Was it a Jewish area where you lived?
There were Jews all over it. There was no specifically a Jewish area, because they had, you know, they walked everywhere. You know, nobody had a car there. You didn't need a car.
What did your father do in Antwerp?
Textiles.
And again, he was traveling and wholesale rather than have a store?
I think so, because I don't remember him having a store. He might not even have brought it into Belgium. I don't know what the rules were then as far as a permit to work. But I think that's why he must have picked Belgium, that they told him that he can live there, not become a citizen, and give him a permit to work. So
How about your schooling in Belgium?
that was the first real Jewish school I went to. And my whole Jewish education till today is what I learned in Belgium. I went there to school to a Beth Jacob for 2 years, and then my parents sent me to Switzerland to a school for a year to learn French properly, because they spoke Flemish. And just to teach me, man, I don't know, it was very, to send your children to a place like that.
Like a finishing school?
Something like that. And I was considered very fancy. I wasn't. And so that's where I was. And so we were about 3 years all together in Belgium and Switzerland.
How did you manage in Flemish? You spoke Hungarian and Slovak before.
Yeah, don't ask. It happened in Belgium. The teacher, I happened to have a Hungarian teacher who was teaching our Hebrew subject, and she called up my mother, please tell me, what does your daughter speak besides Hungarian and Czech? In order to communicate with her, she said, I communicate with her Hungarian, but we don't teach Hungarian here. How could we teach her? So my mother said, I'm so sorry, but that's all she knows. So, but eventually I picked up the French and the Flemish and Hebrew. And that's the only Jewish education I have, because when we came here to Montreal, my parents enrolled me to a Hebrew school, but unfortunately it was not religious. And I had a lot of problems on the winter Friday afternoons that the school finished just when Shabbat started. And so I went to the principal to ask if he could let me out earlier, because I went home with a taxi 2-3 times, but it was very expensive, and I wanted to take the tramway or walk. And he said, I'm sorry, I can't let you out earlier. And I came home every Friday crying, because either I took a taxi or I walked. So my parents took me out, and they put me into a public school, Baron Bing. And I had to also, there was a Beth Yaakov here, but they started with grade 1 and 2 and 3. And I had to go to grade 8 by the time I got here, first year high school, and they only had 6th grade. And every year they had an extra grade. So I didn't want to go 2 years down. So my parents put me into this school, and as it happens, the whole school was full of immigrants, and my whole class happened to be Jewish. Not necessarily religious, but Jewish kids from all over. So there were girls from France, so I knew how to speak French, and then I learned English too.
Going back to Antwerp and the school in Antwerp, what were your other difficulties apart from the language in school?
What did I?
In the school in Antwerp, did you have other difficulties fitting in apart from the language?
Any other language?
No,
Yeah.
any other difficulties fitting into the school in Antwerp?
Well, of course I had difficulties because I never learned Hebrew. I had to learn basically 3 or 4 languages: Flemish, French, and Hebrew. And I was 10 years old, so I missed 4 years already. This was like supposed to be my 4th year high school, or no, elementary school. So I missed 3 years plus the languages. So again, I cried every day when I came home. I don't know how to do this, but eventually I learned, and I didn't cry.
Did you make friends in this school?
Yes, I had. As a matter of fact, 2 of those girls live in Toronto. Whenever I'm in Toronto, I meet them, and whenever before a holiday or a Mazel Tov, we talk to each other. Also, from Czechoslovakia, I have 4 girls. We were 4 girls, and 3 girls. One girl I knew who lived here, but she moved to Toronto, an Ament. And 2 girls that I knew in Czechoslovakia. One moved to Belgium, so I knew her there. We got together, but she went to another school, a little bit more modern. And then she had a cousin who moved to Israel. So I reached her finally. How did I find her? I knew she's married. I didn't know her married name. This was when we went on our honeymoon to Israel. I was determined to look this girl up. And so I called this cousin, who gave me another cousin in Israel to call. And then that cousin told me her married name and gave me her phone number. And I called her, and it was so exciting. And of course, we were going to meet tomorrow. So how am I going to find you? I'm coming we were then in Tel Aviv, and I'll direct you. I'll take you back, and you'll meet my husband. Anyways, we went, and I think the husband was not overjoyed. What happened? They lived in Haifa, and he was a pilot, and all the planes were undercover where they lived. They lived on the base. As a matter of fact, I remember buying something there as a gift in their gift place. And he wasn't happy that we saw all the safety measures that they take. And I told her, please tell your husband not to worry. We're not going to tell anybody that you're there. That's the place of one of the, where you were hiding your planes. Because what happened, if something happened, they just could fly out and be ready to fly. I mean, this was in 1959, 1960.
Going back to Belgium, what did your mother do in Antwerp?
They got together, the ladies in the building, that they have to learn French. So they hired together a French professor. I don't know his name, but I know we called him César, because every time they said something good, he said, César, good. So, and she looked after us. We had a nice life in Belgium, except that my mother had no idea when she went to a grocery store in the winter and she saw tomatoes. So she asked the guy to give her 3-kilo tomatoes. He says, but that's all I have in the store. He said, Madame, nobody buys in the winter 3-kilo tomatoes. You can buy 1 or 2 or 3. It's very, very expensive. So,
who did your parents socialize with in Antwerp?
In Antwerp, well, my aunt came to live there, and 2 aunts, actually. My youngest, who was married, my grandmother lived there. And we made a lot of friends. As a matter of fact, one of the girls that lives under me, my mother was best friends with her late mother. But I was more friendly with her older sister than with her. I think she's a year younger. And her sister was a year older, so I was her older sister's friend, but I knew her. So after, we picked up again in America, and many others, they made friends. They had a good social life in Belgium. As a matter of fact, we lived in one house, and we lived like one family, because if someone had unexpected guests for Kiddush, and they didn't have anything to offer, they would go to my mother's fridge and take out whatever there was and take it to their house till the guests left, and then they gave it back. And we did that to each other. It was like one big family.
So your father decided to move the family here to Montreal in 51, right? You arrived in 51. You arrived in 1951 to Montreal.
51, yeah, almost, yeah.
Sponsored by Rosie and her family. Sponsored by Rosie, your aunt.
Yeah,
Rosie.
my aunt, yeah.
So what were your first impressions on arrival here?
Crying again.
How
Why?
come?
Well, I didn't speak English again. No, I didn't speak English, and that time English was more important than French. I was not up to date, and even my French, I had a big problem. When I spoke, my father took me to the bank to translate. It ended up that the banker who talked to us, he understood what I'm asking, but when he answered, he spoke French Canadian, and I did not understand one word. My father looks at me. I thought you speak French. I said, Daddy, I am speaking French, but he's not. Right, that's what it was. So it was difficult. And again, my mother was very, very homesick here. I mean, her sister, her mother, they all came later. What happened is that we lived in a horrible apartment.
Where?
Here.
But where? Whereabouts?
On Outremont. Yeah, but when we arrived, we went to my aunt. And my aunt lived on St. Urban Street. And my mother gave a look at all those stairs outside. I mean, it wasn't the most elegant. And my parents rented a furnished apartment, a one-bedroom, living room and bathroom and kitchen when we arrived here, because there was no room by my aunt. It was a furnished small on Waverly Street. It was already a little better than St. Urban, and because on St. Urban, they brought the ice every morning to put in the Frigidaire, because very few people had electric Frigidaires after the war. And even they thought that we're so backwards that when we rented that apartment, the guy who came to rent it to us, he said, you know how you flush the toilet? It's magic. You just pull the thing. You know, he thought we came from the war, from the bunkers, and we knew nothing. So this was not very much playing in my mother's, and she missed her family, she missed her friends, and and we went to Park Avenue. Now, Park Avenue in those days was nothing, was like a village. And she heard in Europe, Park Avenue is the fanciest street, but that was New York Park Avenue, not Montreal. And she says, if this is the fanciest street here, oh my goodness, where did you bring me? She told my father. Anyways, it ended up that my mother, as much as she hated, she even missed the rain from Belgium. She said even the rain was good there. Here, nothing is good. At the end, she made great friends, and we lived in another apartment on Outremont, and that's another story. She saw an apartment on Outremont, but the following block, a duplex, and 2 duplexes with a beautiful garden in the middle. And the upstairs window was always closed with blinds. And she found out that the parents of the lady who lived downstairs, that was their apartment, and they never rented it, that it's empty. My mother was not shy. I guess that's where I get it from. And she knocked on the door. And she asked the lady, she said, my name is so-and-so, and we just came, and I'm looking for a nice apartment. And I heard this is a very nice apartment. Would you rent it? She says, I'm not sure. I never wanted to rent it. But so she said, I'll think about it. Come back. I don't know. So she went back with my father. And she fell in love with my mother, even though they didn't speak the same language, because she was not Hungarian, the lady. But they spoke Yiddish, I think. And so we rented that apartment. That's where I became engaged, in that apartment, in Outremont. And then when I was getting married, she saw a whole bunch of carpets that were in the upstairs apartment, and they took it down because it was just lying on the floor. And my mother asked her, tell me, one of those carpets, would you sell it to me? My daughter is getting married. It's this carpet. My daughter is getting married, and I like Persian carpets. Would you sell it to me? Oh, it was my mother's. Anyway, she sold it. My mother bought this, I don't know, in today's money, $500. And it's probably worth, you should know I had a whole bunch of Persian carpets when I moved here. And at that time, Persian carpets were not in style. And I didn't eat here. I didn't eat so much. And I wanted to sell my Persian carpets from my house. Nobody wanted to buy it. It's out of style. The only one they wanted to buy was this one. I had about 3 or 4 dealers. Nobody wanted to buy only this one. I said, well, if it's good for them, I'm keeping it. And I kept it. It's a real antique Persian. Why is it antique? Because every single spot you look down is filled up with something. And it even doesn't have the same color all the way down, because this was made in Iran. And they were very poor, so they would just buy wool for a part, and the whole family would work on it, and then they would buy more wool when they had more money. So it wasn't always the same batch. And so you had to know that it's okay.
When you came to Montreal,
This doesn't belong to the war, what I just told
no,
you
but
about.
it's interesting. When you came to Montreal, did you get any help from the Jewish community? Or did you ask for any help from your parents?
I don't think so. I know that my aunt had a baby here, and she was quite sick, Clary. They lived in a furnished apartment at the time, and the landlady told her, the one who lived upstairs, that there is a bacha kind of a place, and they would send you a help for the baby. So that's the only help that I remember.
Where did you, like what, which part of the community did your family go and get close to? Where did you go to synagogue? Which became your...
Here?
Yeah, here.
Well, I grew up in Outremont area, and at that point I had finished school. And
No, but when you first came in 51, you and your family, which community did you join?
You know,
synagogue?
everybody was the same community. You were so happy if you met on the street someone that you knew. And, you know, I remember my aunt Yutzi getting married in Israel. And so it was still Tzena time, and we lived in Belgium. And she had her wedding in Israel because her fiance lived there, and she was moving to Israel. So my parents brought maybe 10 salamis from Antwerp to Israel. So what do you think the biggest specialty on that wedding was? Salami sandwiches. Everybody was running for the salami sandwiches. And my aunt had it, so many people came, whoever she met, they knew she invited them to the wedding. And here also, there was not such a big community. It just grew now with all the children, everybody having many, many more children. You know, my parents had 2, I had 3. My children, one has 8, and 6, and 5. You know, the next generation, as you grew, the generations, they had more children, they could afford it. They can't afford it, but they have them anyways. But people who came back from the war were not having big families. First of all, who survived? Whoever had. There was many people, second marriages. They lost their first whole family and they remarried. So there were very few intact families here. You know, the parents, everybody came from somewhere in our community.
Who became your parents' social circle here? Who were their friends here?
The same people that I'm friends with their children, and I'm friends with likewise people here in this area.
And they were all refugees, their friends?
The friends, yes. Yes.
Were they all refugees, Hungarian-speaking refugees? Because there were a lot of Polish Jews who came, but they spoke
There
Polish
were
or
a
Yiddish?
lot of, no, Polish went to Toronto, most of them, and Hungarians came here. And the stores had Hungarian sales ladies, the kosher stores. And the kosher grocery had Hungarian people. And, you know, it was very Hungarian. When my husband moved here, he didn't speak a word of Hungarian. And, you know, he says, you really have to know Hungarian to live here. So,
How about your schooling? You first went to the Hebrew Academy and then they
to
took you out.
Barabing.
And then
My schooling wasn't so exciting because, as you know, I came as an, immigrant, and thank God I passed high school, which was a big feat in those days because it was hard. We had 11 subjects and you had to do it in 6 days. 2 a day, and then one, the 11th, was left over.
for graduation, you mean?
For the last year. It's now, every year they have a few subjects in high school, in every grade a few. In our days, and I was an immigrant, we had to have in 1 week everything. Now, I didn't know any Canadian history or very little, and it was very, excuse me, boring. I knew more about the French Revolution than I knew here. And Israel was new. So there goes the history, and I had to learn French. I had to learn English. No, French I knew, but they had us in a French subject, so that was good. Then I had to learn English, and the math was totally different, and I'm not good at math. So what's left? Very little. So I had a hard time, yes, but I managed to pass, and not on the bottom, but not on the top, like medium. And then my parents sent me to a business school to learn to type and shorthand. And my father wouldn't let me go to college, to university. You're a religious girl. It's not the best idea. So, but I was able to go to take some courses at night. Sir George Williams. And I worked for my father and his partner. How did he get the partner? His partner knew him in Europe. And he knew that he's a good businessman, and he came to the boat to wait for us. And he said to my father, I came here because I don't want you to settle with any, I want you to be my partner. And he had lace and embroidery, and then we extended it to textiles, and then the Chinese came into it. But by then, I think they separated because my brother became a grown man. He needed a parnassa, and my husband came into the picture. And so they took, Mr. Sass took the embroidery business, and my father took the building business. They did, they were in real estate. And so my husband came into the real estate and learned, and my brother went to the embroidery business. And then Mr. Sass retired and passed away, so my brother ran. It was his business, and he gave his wife what came to her as a partner. She just passed away not long ago, the wife.
Going back to the school, to Baron Byng, what were your initial difficulties in the school? Because you mentioned that it was difficult.
It was.
Not
well,
just the language, but you had other...
I tell you, I was an outgoing person, and I made a lot of friends in the class. But I was not used to the mentality. First of all, there were some Canadian girls there. They wore lipstick. I was a kid. You know, I was like 13. In Europe, you were a child, and they were already grown up, and they behaved like grown-ups. And they even smoked secretly. I mean, to me, that was like, I was a kid, and they were like the next generation at the same age. And also they had boys, but not in the same class, not then. So, you know, the girls when sat with the boys for lunch, this was not for me, and it was very difficult. And when I had my high school graduation, you had to bring an escort. Now, who am I going to call for an escort? And I want to go to my graduation, why not? Well, we had some very, very good friends down the block, and we were friendly with them. And they had a son and a daughter, our age. And so my mother asked him to ask me if he could take me to my graduation. I wouldn't ask a boy. So she asked him that he should ask me, because I wouldn't ask. And I mean, I knew, but it still felt better than for me to go and ask a boy. I mean, that was unheard of.
So you said that these girls were very different. So did they kind of put you aside, or did they include you in their circles?
Surprisingly, no. I was very friendly with the classroom. And, you know, I went to a class reunion, I don't know, 40th, and my husband came with me too. And we all met, whoever you remember or whoever came, and it was like yesterday. We recognized each other because you don't change that much. And one said, I remember you when you came to school with a bow in your hair. You know, it wasn't to mock me, it's just to point out how different I was then and now.
But did they mock you at the time for your bow or for your difference? Did they make fun of you at the time?
They didn't mock me, and they didn't say anything. No, they were very nice. They were also immigrants, most of them. Some were not, but most of them. But if they were not religious, they spoke to the boys and went out with boys, even at 14 and 15. And graduation was already 17, right? But I still lived in the olden. Well, I want to tell you something. The boy had to really approach a girl, even non-religious and even non-Jewish. That was, of course. And when my children had to be married, everything was okay. We found 3 lovely people, but already people introduced them to me, and we checked out who it was. Some went out with 5 boys, some went out with the first one. You know, it was different. But then when it came to my grandchildren, it was a problem, because you're religious. How are you going to find a girl who is as religious as you are, and they're not in Montreal? How are you going to find them? So that's how the shadchan came into the picture, and she tried to, and the girls, unfortunately, my youngest granddaughters had to go to New York to meet the boy. And I was devastated that it is a mixed up world, because the mother said, why should I send my son to Montreal? There's 100 girls around me in New York living. Why do I need a girl from Montreal? But all the nice boys were there in yeshiva. So how does the cat go over the But as it happens, when my first granddaughter went to New York, I found out. I spoke to my son. I says, how could you do that? He says, what, Mommy? I said, you send your daughter to meet the boy in New York? He's not coming to your house? He says, Mommy, face reality. You want my daughter to get married? This is 19 whatever. So she had to go. But it happened that I have 6 granddaughters and all the 6 boys came here. So I had my wish.
What did your brother do? Did he go to school here when you came?
My brother went first here, yes, to school, but there was Lubavitch. So he went to the Lubavitch yeshiva. For me, there wasn't, but for him, there was. And then he went to New York to yeshiva, and he became Lubavitch. So when he wanted to get married, it was a problem because they introduced him only to like Russian girls, you know, that type, and he wasn't used to that type of girls. You know, coming from a Hungarian background, that just didn't go together. So my parents went to the Lubavitch Rebbe to ask what they should do. He says, sorry, you got it all wrong. You have to find a Hungarian girl who wants to be Lubavitch. And that's what happened. I have a wonderful sister-in-law who is Hungarian, and we knew each other before in Belgium still. And we knew the Gestetner family still. It was a famous family in Hungary. They didn't live in Budapest, they lived in Újpest. And so they got married. And all the children are Lubavitch by them.
Who were your friends outside of school when you went to Baron Bing?
Oh yeah, I had a lot of friends.
Who were they? How did you meet them?
One friend I met in school, she was a redhead, I was a redhead. Her name was Vera, my name was Vera. She spoke Hungarian, I spoke Hungarian, and we just hit it off right away. And so she was my outside friend. And then I met some girls, and she met some girls, and then we made a group that we were all immigrants.
All Hungarian speaking?
No. But we were all immigrant newcomers.
And all the same religious level of religion?
Yes.
Where did you meet these girls?
I went to Mizrahi, which was on Park Avenue. So I met many of them there. And how did I meet? I don't know. I had friends. I always had a lot of friends.
What did you do in the Mizrahi? What kind of activities?
Well,
what kind of activities did you girls do in the Mizrahi?
Well, we went on excursions, on boat rides, on ski trips, on the regular thing, what girls do. We went to movies.
But the Mizrahi is a Zionist organization, religious Zionist organization. Was there any thinking on your part of moving to Israel?
No. That was just a group of religious boys and girls that met. Okay, I became much more religious after I was married, or when my brother became so religious, I was like on a borderline. Will I wear a wig or not? And my mother was pushing for it because she said, she never told me why. Because she didn't want her 2 children. She only had 2 to go into 2 different directions. And my brother was very solidly religious and Lubavitch. I was religious. I was not Lubavitch. I'm not Lubavitch today. I'm not anything today. I'm just a religious person.
Let's talk about your husband. How did you meet your husband?
You want the whole story again?
Yes.
there was a Aguda. This time it's not Mizrahi. By that time already, Aguda was more religious than Mizrahi. There was a convention in Senegal up north. And, you know, my parents were still very European, and I wanted to go to the convention. So they came also. So many older people came and younger people, so it wasn't so unusual that my parents came. But I knew that they came because they didn't want me to go alone. So I was a pretty good sport about it, I must say. And, you know, my mother was always very possessive. And I always used to tell her, Mommy, do you know that I give more permission to my children and grandchildren than you give to me? She says, this chachma I heard already from you. You're my daughter and that's it. She never wanted me to ride a bike because I could fall off and this and that. But the piano was safe, so I had piano lessons and so forth. You get the idea.
She's very protective.
Very, very. And because you asked how were we quiet, we were quiet because after the war, we came back. My mother always had headaches, and she would lie down. And my father said, you cannot make noise. Mommy's lying down, you play quietly, and when she'll wake up, you'll talk to her. So I was brought up as a good girl and a good boy. We listened to our father. I mean, everybody did. Unless you were a rebellious person, we all had respect. My parents never called my grandmother in a second person. If mother wants, what would mother want to have for lunch, this, that, or... It's not what do you want, it's what mother would want, right? In English, there is no such a thing. It's you and you, plural or not. But in many other languages, you have you and you, two different...
Magázódás. Magázták.
Yeah. So how did I... Anyway, so it turned out that we were on the train already, and the train, on the radio, they kept saying like just before we left, we were already on the train moving, so we couldn't get off. And there were these five girls came from New York for this Aguda convention. And they came on the train right away as they arrived from New York. They went straight to the train. They knew they had to take this and this train to get to Senegal. Okay, and there were not too many people on the train because slowly and surely there became such a snowstorm that the radios in Montreal kept saying the whole time, whoever did not leave up north, there's a huge snowstorm on the way, you will not make it, don't leave. We were on the train and we got stuck halfway. So in Saint-Jérôme, it was a big city then. And so my parents went out, we didn't know what's gonna happen, to buy matches and candles and sardines and fruits. What if we get stuck here? There's nothing to eat here. Anyways, they cleaned the tracks and we continued till Senegal. And these five girls were sitting with us because they were religious girls, and we found out that they're going to the same place as us, so we made friends right away. One girl I knew from this group, vaguely, but I knew who she was. And so we arrived to Senegal actually a minute before Shabbat. Like my mother walked in, took off her boots, and in her coat she lit the candles. That's how close we arrived. And nobody else came for the convention, just my parents and we 6 girls the 5 guests and me. So of course we sat by the same table and we had a great time. And at night, by then after Shabbat, the snowstorm was over and it was early Shabbat went out, so they had a chance to come up and there was a convention and Sunday was a convention. And Monday, there was an American holiday. That's why the girls were able to come, because they had no school on Monday. So my parents said, you know what, would you like to come to us? We don't have enough beds, but we have blankets and quilts, and you're welcome to stay by us till Monday night, and then you travel home. So they came, and they had a wonderful time. My parents were the most fun people you could ever remember. I asked my friends, your parents were the most fun, really. And, you know, they never cried, they never crashed, they never talked. But about the war, they did talk. And they were one of the few parents that talked about the war. Because I know many, many children. But I was also, even though they talked about it, I was still a Holocaust child. Because we took, our positions changed. We became like the parents and they became like the children. We were always careful not to disrupt, not to make them angry, not to upset them, because they went through a lot. Like we kids didn't feel like we went through so much because, you know, we were with my parents and my grandmother, like we didn't feel it as much as the grown-ups. And so, but I did talk to the children. So when the pandemic came, they always told me, I don't understand, Bobby. You're so calm and you don't feel upset that you have to stay in your house. I said, children, it's not so terrible. I said, during the war, we didn't have air conditioning, we didn't have heat. Here we have both. Nobody's shooting at us. So it's hard, and we have to be very careful. But it's not because someone is our enemy, it's a sickness, and we'll ride it out. So they could not understand how I was not upset. And then in the middle, my husband got sick, so obviously I was in the house from just before the COVID till after he passed away, which took about 4 years. So that's...
Let's go back to how you...
How?
You're telling me how you met your husband.
One of the girls in the group from New York was my future sister-in-law. And she said, you were so nice to us. Please, when you come to New York, call us. My parents are coming soon from Portugal. My brother went to pick them up. They were coming to America. They are still in a hotel. But I would like them to meet you because I want them to see who was so nice to us when we came. It's the girl and her parents. And so she introduced me to her parents when I came, but she had exams, and she felt very, very bad that she cannot reciprocate the same way. First of all, her parents were still living in a hotel, waiting for an apartment, coming from Portugal. And she had exams. So she said, but my brother is free now. If he'll take you, he'll show you around. I said, you know, it's not the end of the world. Fine, I'll come again to New York and we'll get together. No, my brother wants to show you New York. And the rest is history.
What was your husband's name?
Moses. His Portuguese name was Moses because his Jewish name was Moshe. It was Moses or Moises in Portuguese. And my sister-in-law's name was Dina because both of them were biblical names, and they could use them in Portugal. They were born in Portugal. As it happens that my husband was named after his grandfather, but it happened to be Moishe, so that worked out.
He was born in Portugal, in which town?
Lisbon.
And what year?
My husband was born in 32.
And tell me a little bit about his family, because that's also interesting, how they ended up, his family in Portugal.
Oh, well, my father-in-law ran away from the Polish army. And at that time, when World War II came, he had no more papers left, no papers. And the only country at that time that would take in anybody without a passport was Portugal and Cuba. And as a matter of fact, my mother-in-law, who lived in Germany and ended up in Portugal visiting, she had a sister in Portugal. They wanted to go to Cuba. It was a brother. And a sister and brother-in-law wanted to go to Israel. So they met in Portugal because that was the place they could come in. And they all ended up, one went to Cuba and then to America, and one sister went to Israel, and my in-laws stayed in Portugal. My father-in-law had a good business.
What did he do? What kind of business?
He had all kinds of things. Dry goods, maybe you would call it today, like little knives and jewelry and sewing spools, like dry goods, right? And he sent his daughter to Israel to learn for a year after the war already. And my late husband was sent to New York, to Yeshiva University, and he took a course, he became a chemical engineer. And when we were getting married, had to make a decision where he's going to make money, where he can support me. We were engaged 7 months because he would not get married until he had a steady parnasa. So what ended up that my father gave him an invitation to come here because he had a place in his business for him. Or if he wants to continue his chemical engineering, he could do it here. But that was not a choice because at that time you could not be Shomer Shabbat and work for the medical facilities. So how did we know this? We met another, he was Dr. Pfeiffer, no, Dr. Bieberfeld. He was a chemist, but he ended up he was a doctorate he had. He was a teacher, a lecturer, and we went to visit them to find out about what my husband's chances was, and he said, don't even try. He said, I tried for many years, doesn't work. So if you want to come here, you have to find something else. So my father gave him a position. Of course, my in-laws were not the happiest, but my father-in-law had a stroke in Portugal before they came. And he certainly had nowhere to take his son in. He still went with the subway to customers, but very hard. He was limping already at that point. And so that was out of the question.
You also had an interesting story, since we are talking about your in-laws, about your mother-in-law's family and how they came to Germany. Can you tell that story again?
Yes, of course. Well, my mother-in-law's family lived in Poland on the border of Germany, another border. And her father was a shochet, and he was a religious shochet. She always told me he was so spotless, you never saw a blood on his white coat when he did the Shechita. And one day, it was a small village in Portugal, in Poland, and they wanted to kill him because he said the cow is treif, it's not kosher. How can you say it's not kosher? You know how poor we are and how hungry we are, and we can't afford. You know, we paid, the community paid for the cow, and now we have to get rid of it. We can't do that. And they actually wanted to kill him. So they ran away. He ran away with his family and went across the border to Germany. And then her parents ended up going on Aliyah in 1920 to Israel. And that's...
But she stayed in Germany, your mother-in-law?
Yeah.
And then how
And
did
she had a brother there and a sister. And the brother was a dentist, and she was my mother-in-law was his assistant, which was most unusual in those days. And
when did they leave Germany?
oh, well, she left Germany. Her son, my husband was born already, and she was married, obviously. It must have been 29, 30 then.
And why? So she left Germany. How did she end up in Lisbon, Portugal? That's not. It wasn't clear to me.
The Portuguese story.
Yeah. How
Yeah.
your mother-in-law ended up from Germany to Portugal?
The same way, because she was leaving Germany already, and then it wasn't such, I don't even know if she had a passport, but I know that she had already two sisters living there, waiting, one to go to Israel and waiting. So she thought she'd go to Israel to her parents. But as it ended up, that my father-in-law ended up in Portugal too. Because
And they met there.
And they met there, and they decided to stay there for many years. And during the war, they had many, many immigrants sleeping by them on the floor and eating, and they took care of them because they had nowhere to turn. And so they were very helpful to the Jews, but they themselves did not have a war, but it was scary because the Germans used to love to come to Portugal because there was a casino there, and it was elegant, and it was a free country, and it was beautiful. So they came there to have their vacations. So, you know, they walked around on the street. It was scary, even though Portugal did not join the war, but if you had German guys with German behavior, you were scared. As a matter of fact, to tell you the truth, we went once to Israel via Germany, and I told my husband, never again. We had to wait 3 hours at the airport for our connection to Israel, and I could not stand the way they spoke German. The real German. I spoke German because I learned from my mother-in-law. That was our common language before she learned English. They were not Hungarian. And I said, I can't take this. That's it. Never again. And then we were in Israel also. We went to a kibbutz, which had a lot of survivors lived there, and they had a museum about the Holocaust in that kibbutz. And there were a lot of German young people there, tourists. And I went over to one person. I said, do you mind if I ask you something? No, of course not. I spoke German. I said, how come that you're interested to come to Israel and see a Holocaust museum? Why would you want to be here? She said, because we want to know the truth. Our parents never talked about it. They knew it was some kind of a secret, but they never talked about it, and we want to know about it. And you see that at the end they had a Merkel who was a good president, except now they've, again, they have to follow rules.
You got married in 1959, you mentioned
Yes.
that. And did you work in your husband's business before
Yes,
your kids?
Yes,
Yeah.
I worked in my husband's business. First, I worked in my father's business for a while, and then I had my children. I did not work. When my last daughter, my third daughter, was 6 years old and went to grade 1, that's when I went back to work, and I went to my husband. And so it's a story. My father's secretary left him, who was with him 25 years. He would dictate in German, and she would right away write it in English or French. She was Mrs. Brandeis. And she left because her children were living in Toronto, and when she got older, she left. She wanted to go to the children. My father was devastated. How is he going to find such a secretary? I said, I tell you what, Daddy, I'm not such a secretary, but I'll come in and help you until we find someone that you will like. Anyways, that someone turned out to be me for a while, and then we hired somebody else, and then I went to my husband. My mother says, how could you leave Daddy? I said, I didn't leave him, I went to my husband.
And you did the same thing? You helped him with the secretary, the office
Well,
work?
I helped him in the factory with the workers, with secretarial work. I was a collector of people who owed our company. I did that with my father too. He taught me, he says, I'm a good giver, but I'm a good mourner. I'm a good payer, and I'm also a good collector. He says, you don't neglect it. It's a business, it's not charity. You want to give charity, you give charity. And he gave a lot of charity. But business is business, and if people owe you, you have to collect, and you have to go and collect 10 times sometimes. But
Were they, you mentioned that your father brought your husband into the business, so did they stay partners?
No, that wasn't then yet. No, that was before. And then, Mr. Sass, who was my father's partner, they decided, and my uncle was in it too, everybody decided to take a part of the business. Everybody was having growing children or married children, and they didn't want, you couldn't take in everybody's son-in-law and everybody's daughter-in-law into the business, or grandchildren. So that's when they separated. They said, we'll stay forever friends if we don't stay in the business together.
And then your husband went off on his own and he made Exwood.
And no, so my husband worked for my father, but then later, when they separated the businesses, that was years later, my husband took a part of the business and he did construction. And my father took the textile business because they were dealing with, he went, when they separated, they were also in the construction business. So my husband took part of the construction, and my father built up Transitexim, which comes from transit, export, and import, Transitexim. And my father decided to start a textile business. He was always in the textiles, so he knew about the business, but it was a different textile business than he was used to. And he was one of the very first Chinese people who went to China to make a connection. As a matter of fact, when the Chinese people came and they had these, their little audition, to make, what do you call them? Little, not computers, adding machines,
Oh,
the
yeah,
little one.
the-
So they would add it on it, and my father knew the price in 2 seconds. Oh, Mr. Treitel, computer here? Was very smart.
You mentioned your children. You have 3 children.
Yes,
What is their names?
Sarah and Meyer and Shulamit. They're all married, and they all live in Montreal and happen to live on the same block, which is very unusual. It's not because they're on the same block, but because they're all here. And I'm a very lucky person. Now that my husband is gone, I have my children here, 1 block down. And we moved to this small apartment, it's condominium, 7 years ago. And I always said it wasn't a minute too early, because then my husband started not feeling well. And so it was good we were on 1 floor. And it was easier for me to have the children closer. They came all the time to visit, and they tried to drag me out, but it didn't work.
I wanted to ask it too fast. Yes. What synagogue did you go to when your children were growing up? What community did you belong? What
So
synagogue?
what happened is that we went, the Yeshiva Gedola, which is on Deacon Road, was very close to our old house. We lived on Diem Avenue, which is actually across from Van Horn, the other direction. And there was a synagogue there. And actually there was another synagogue on Van Horn, which was not too far from coming through the back. But then when we moved here, it was too hard for my husband to walk there, so he went to another synagogue, a Hasidic synagogue across the street. It's called Rabbi Katz Zhibo. And he's a very, very, very knowledgeable man, and very nice, and he's not old. And they used to live in, not in, I think in Brazil after the war, and then they came here.
Did you say that your parents talked a lot about the war? And
My parents?
That your parents talked a lot about the war, yes. Did you talk about the war with your husband and with your children, your experiences?
I did. Yes, I told them. As a matter of fact, I told them when we still lived in the other house, and we all had a wonderful time, and we would sit Shabbat with guests and with my beautiful dishes and my silver candlesticks and a beautiful home. And I said, you know, kids, I don't think this is our last stop. You see, there in the corner, we have an invisible cane. I said, we are Jewish, and no matter how good it is, we never know what's going to be. And guess what? And now, to tell you that I'm upset, I'm very upset. Scared, I'm not scared. I'm an old lady, but I feel very, very, very bad for my children. It's very, very scary for them. They shot into the yeshiva where my son went, and now his grandchildren go there. And it's scary with what's going on.
How do you feel that your war experiences influence your life? What impact your experiences during the war had on your life after the war?
Oh, we didn't forget the war for a long time. I remember I got married when I was 21, and whenever a plane went, I was still going like that. Okay? The war was over when I was 6, and it's still like you put your head down. And I used to wake up screaming. As a matter of fact, my husband used to wake me up. It's nothing, you're having a nightmare. It lasted for a very, very long time.
What were your nightmares about?
About planes and shooting. I don't know. It was scary. I don't know. I would scream.
Where did you experience planes and shooting during the war? When you were in the bunker?
Well, yeah, we heard shooting outside, sure. Yeah. And, you know, everybody, whoever you saw was walking around with guns in those days. Even the peasants, everybody had a gun. So you knew about shooting. We didn't exactly know how it works, that you push and you kill because you were a kid. But then later on, of course,
But you heard shooting around.
I heard shooting. I knew what shooting sounds like. So I heard shooting and planes, and I would wake up. That took a while.
Is there anything else you would like to add that I didn't ask?
I am a very grateful person, and I always, not spoiled, that's what I think. Everyone else thinks that I'm spoiled because I have a beautiful home, and I had wonderful parents who spoiled me, but I was never spoiled. I didn't like it. I didn't want to be spoiled. So I was always like revolting about fancy things, you know, what happens. And I was always very appreciative of my good parents. I knew they were wonderful. My grandmother was great. My family was wonderful, friendly. We were very close. I had a wonderful husband and a nice family from his side. Very close we were. So I was very happy, and I had 3 children, and we were working very hard for the community together. He did not the same. I did my thing. I was in the yeshiva, in the Beis Yaakov, in the Shaare Tzedek Hospital. I was president in many places, and he was a businessman, but he undertook to do. He built a yeshiva because he was supervising the yeshiva, free, day and night. You know, when the janitor didn't show up, who do you think they called in the middle of the night? My husband was the glorified janitor. And because he knew everything in the school and in the yeshiva, he was there. When they built it, he knew what was broken, what had to be fixed, who do you call? So that's what we did, and he was in the Hebrew Free Loan. And many, many things that I heard after from people who came, all the things he did. And he was a wonderful father. He never had to raise his voice. He just looked at the kids and they ran to do it. I was the vocal one. I would yell and scream and they wouldn't listen. You know, that's why. So I had no one to fight with because my husband never answered. So it was no use fighting. So we never fought.
Anything else to add? Anything else to add to your interview, to your story?
No, I have, I don't like to say the numbers. I have 19 grandchildren, Baruch Hashem, more than I had. I have 5 by 1, 8, and 6. And I have, Baruch Hashem, many, many, many great-grandchildren. I had, as a matter of fact, last week, a little boy that they gave my husband's name. And 3 weeks ago, a little granddaughter that they gave my mother's name. So, and I'm looking for this, my grandson, my oldest of the three little ones. I have three grandsons still not married, but the oldest of them, which is very old, 22 years old, he's getting married end of June. So I'm busy. Last night I stayed up very late stuffing envelopes. And now that's my life, my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, and my family, my cousins. We're very close. Everybody's busy and we don't see each other too much, even though I have a few living here, but everybody's running, everybody has big families. And I hope that Hashem will let me be, and my children will arrive to this point in their lives, to be great-grandparents, and Mashiach will come, and we'll all end up in Israel, right? I have already their 4 grandchildren.
Well, thank you very much, Vera, for the interview.
Thank you for listening. It was a very long story.
It
My
was.
goodness.
I told you it's going to be a long story.